Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's SeedWorld Retail Strategy webinar. I am Mark Zinkowitz, and I am editor for SeedWorld Canada, and I'm happy to be your host. Now, if you registered for this webinar last month, you'll know we had some technical issues, and our audience actually couldn't view the webinar. So what I want to do right off the bat here is to ask our audience to please let us know if you can see us and hear us. I know there's a little bit of a delay when we... Andy Chen says it works. Thank you, Andy. I am seen, I am heard. Excellent. All right, we are up and running. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I'm getting the thumbs up. Perfect. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Well, we're working, so that's half the battle. It's great when technology does what it is supposed to do. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsor, CCAN, for their support. During our webinar today, you'll very likely, I hope, have some questions. If you do have questions, please type them into the chat box at any time during the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. You can ask your question anytime. There's a little Q&A tab there in the chat that you can put your question in. So please just type it in. Let us know who it's directed to. You don't have to wait until the very end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website, seedworld.com/Canada, following the event. And we have 5 speakers today. We have Jeff Reed, General Manager of CCAN, Brent Durkach, CEO for Canterra Seeds. We have Jocelyn Velistuk, Chair of Canadian Wheat Research Coalition. Candice Woods is Project Coordinator in Alberta at Crop Diversification Centre South. And Todd Green is Director of Agricultural Services for the County of Newell in Alberta. Hi, everybody. How are you today?
Good. Awesome. Great to see you, Mark. Great to see everybody.
Great. Good to see all of you, and thank you again for coming back and helping me give this a round 2 after our technical problems last time. So thank you so much, everybody. So I'm going to start today with Jeff Reed. But before we get to Jeff, I just kind of wanted to set the stage for this, as our audience knows about the reported research cuts at AAFC. They have really put new pressure on Canada's plant breeding pipeline, and nowhere is that pressure felt more acutely, I think it's safe to say, than here in Western Canada. This is a region where crop innovation underpins competitiveness, diversification, long-term resilience. Plant breeding is not a luxury, it's foundational infrastructure. And so that's why I wanted to do this webinar, is to bring together people from across the seed and crop development system to explore an important question. If we could design the ideal plant breeding model for Western Canada today, what could that look like, knowing what we know about global competition, funding constraints, producer needs? And if Canada intends to remain globally competitive, we can't afford to treat plant breeding like it's optional or assume that the current system will sustain itself. So today's conversation is going to be about what needs to change and what could be built in its place. So we're going to explore how our panelists today think AAFC research cuts could impact plant breeding capacity, what an ideal breeding system could realistically look like, how plant breeding can be funded sustainably over the long term, and what can and should change if Canada is really serious about maintaining our leadership in crop innovation. So this is a timely and important discussion. This is only the beginning of the discussion. We're going to be having other webinars like this. There are so many people across this country, especially here in Western Canada, who are knowledgeable about this and who have important voices. And so today is only the beginning of what I'm sure is going to be a very long and detailed conversation. So thank you, everyone. And I'll begin my conversation with Jeff. The rest of you, please hang on the line. We're going to be hearing from you very shortly. So Jeff, a lot of people have heard about these AAFC cuts in the abstract. They've read articles, they've watched coverage on it. I mean, it's been many weeks now since this was first announced. Right. To you, what could these cuts really mean for farmers on the prairies over the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think in the 1 to 3 year time range, probably the biggest impact could be the loss or potential loss of those provincial variety trial locations. We've heard about cuts at Indian Head, Scott, Portage, Lacombe, and longer term, that's going to have big implications on plant breeding as we look at needing multi-locations in order to screen for the very best broadly adapted varieties. But in the short run, it would be those regional registration trials. Although we have heard, maybe a little bit of good news in that a lot of those trials will still be going in the ground, at least this spring. I guess bigger question is, what's the capacity going to be for all of the necessary note-taking and harvesting that has to happen this fall. So fingers crossed. I think as industry and the rest of us, we're really working hard to find solutions, not only to kind of keep the wheels from falling off this year, but maybe more importantly, looking out, in that longer term, to see what the solutions are going to be and how we can all come together. But that's really still up in the air what the longer term solutions are going to look like.
Yeah, like I say, just the beginning of the conversation here. So, like, from your perspective, I mean, okay, what's the most urgent risk if we don't move quickly? I mean, not in theory, but in terms of like real bottlenecks, like, breeding programs, field sites, people. I mean, what from CCAN's perspective, from your perspective, what is that most urgent risk if we don't move fast on this?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're already here in the middle of March, and excuse me, those sites, represent tens of thousands of plots that should be going in the ground in just a matter of a few weeks. So certainly the clock is ticking. We're not sure necessarily that everyone has clear direction on what's going to happen, and that's just sort of the nature of things when these kind of cuts take place. But certainly, our big concern is that, we have good people at these locations, and, if they can't see a really secure future for themselves, how many of them are going to be lost. And that would be, a real travesty given the importance of some of those locations. When you think about Lacombe, a very unique location for assessing barley disease, Indian Head, really critical for fusarium, for example, in Durham. And then, of course, you have the seed increase unit, which, again, we've been assured will stay in place at least for 2026 at Indian Head. So that's good news. But longer term, if that seed increase unit is going to move, then you've got all kinds of issues there with sorting out rotation and so on, because from us as industry side, it's just a disaster if you have contaminated breeder seed as a result of any of these changes. Then that's just a nightmare for the seed industry, really.
Yeah, exactly. One concern we've heard is the lack of transparency and consultation up front. And Aaron McPherson, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister at AAFC, actually wrote in a column to Seedworld Canada recently. You can find that on our website. It'll be in our March print edition. And she pointed out quite rightly that this was as noted on our slide here, this was a cost-saving initiative to deliver over $154 million in savings by 2029. I mean, the Prime Minister asked every government department, I need you to cut up to 15%. And so this was the result of something very specific that the Prime Minister had asked for. Nonetheless, we hear that well, AAFC didn't consult, they haven't consulted us about this. And so looking forward, proactively here, being positive about this, saying, okay, what does, if you're going to consult, what does meaningful consultation rather with industry and producers need to look like, and how quickly does that need to happen?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think fortunately some of that discussion has already started in earnest with AAFC management, and that was really encouraging. A couple of weeks ago, a lot of us met at the PGDC meetings in Banff, and I think had some substantive discussions there. And understandably, when these kinds of decisions come down from government, there's a lot of things that can't be shared, can't be said up front. But I think now, the real hard work is going to begin. We're really going to need to have a lot of transparency from both sides to say, where are the gaps going to be left once the dust settles, and what are the expectations of producers and industry and everyone else to fill those voids. I think we're at a point now where farmers and the seed industry at large really have a huge amount riding on these programs, and quite frankly have a huge amount invested. So we all need to feel like we're kind of being equal partners sitting around the table and looking for longer term solutions.
Yeah. I mean, CCAN's in an interesting spot, right? Because you really sit in the middle of breeders, seed companies, producers. What's happening behind the scenes right now to protect the breeding pipeline, and what would you want people to feel reassured about after this webinar?
Right. Yeah. So it's an interesting position, because CCAN really does sit in the middle, and I think therefore, some people may be a little surprised to hear that as CCAN, we're not advocating for a CCAN solution. What we're advocating for is really as a whole of sector solution that's going to involve public, private, producers, industry, government, and really, we don't believe that any one sector of the industry is going to solve this all on their own. So nobody ultimately is going to have a monopoly, we don't think, over that solution. But what we do know is that these programs and public breeding programs are really critical. But we also know that public breeding doesn't need to be government breeding, right? We can all work together as industry to really keep those resources and those genetics and so on in the public sphere, where they're not totally tied up by any individual company or group of companies. So I think, behind the scenes right now, there's a lot going on, I think, between the provinces, universities, the federal government, and industry all coming together. And what I think has been really heartening about this whole process is to see that there's really been a heightened level of awareness, even right up to the political level. When we see the ag committees in Ottawa really focusing on this topic, and again, thanks to those like seed growers and CFA and so on for coming forward with resolutions and taking action on Parliament Hill to really raise the awareness of this. So I would say, all of that being the case, I'm actually personally feeling a little more confident about our future and finding a solution, just if nothing else, because there's so much awareness that has been raised in recent weeks.
Yeah, I like that. That public breeding doesn't necessarily mean government breeding, and it's a good reminder that there's all kinds of public involvement in breeding, whether it's universities. We're going to hear from Candace and Todd from the County of Newell shortly. That's a facility in Alberta that was historically provincial research facility, has now been taken over by municipal government. I mean, there's all kinds of different frameworks and arrangements, and so that's why one reason I find this is an interesting discussion, because there's just so many possibilities for different partnerships. And before we move on to Jocelyn, Jeff, if there's policymakers watching this, people from AAFC, if they take one message away from this discussion, what would you want it to be in terms of how industry is ready to collaborate and what a workable path forward might look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess at the risk of stating the obvious, I would say, hey, clearly we're all on the same team here, and we get the fact that there are, it has been expressed by the federal government that there's a need for cuts. But really, I think industry can really help in that regard by helping to make the system more efficient, by identifying, okay, where are there things that can be done differently? But I think in order to get there, we really just need transparency, and we need to have the openness to look at new models and models, quite frankly, that are employed in other industries. If we look at how airports function, or even nuclear energy for that matter, you have a lot of examples of where industry is working alongside the federal government, in many cases with federally owned land and infrastructure. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think as industry we get it, and I think we can help to do things better and more efficiently, and maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, looking back, we say, hey, maybe this was a good thing that we were all forced to figure this out.
Yeah, good points. Thank you, Jeff. We'll return to you later when we do our Q&A. Don't go anywhere.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much. Great. Now I'd like to welcome our next guest. Jocelyn Velastuk is chair of the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition. How are you today, Jocelyn?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Now, thanks again for joining us. Now, the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition recently reviewed Canada's wheat breeding innovation system in an effort to safeguard its ability to serve the evolving needs of Canadian farmers. And so I asked you to be on, Jocelyn, to add some important relevance to this whole discussion as we look to advancing plant breeding for the future. Now, before we talk about the report, you were going to give just a brief overview of CWRC. You had some slides here. And so I was just hoping you could just take a quick minute here and just kind of fill people in on what CWRC is and why it exists.
For sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition is a coalition of the Sask Wheat, Manitoba Crop Alliance, and Alberta Grains. So these three organizations together have created the CWRC about 7 years ago now. And it was really to be able to work with the different organizations such as universities and AAFC to administer some of these core breeding agreements and the wheat cluster. And since we have taken a look at, we've taken a review of the entire wheat breeding innovation system. And the reason for that is that we have significant skin in the game as farmers. And I think if anything has come out of the recent cuts and news on the cuts, it's that there's a highlight on how much farmers have funded wheat breeding in Saskatchewan, as well as research, and how important that research and wheat breeding is to where we are today as farmers. So when we took a look at the different phases. We went through context development, the key stakeholder consultations, which were 29 interviews of different stakeholders within the industry. There was a review of all the reports available. I believe there was around 28 reports that were reviewed. And also we looked at what the different systems in different countries look like. So we had CWRC workshops, and as well identifying the next steps, which we are currently doing.
Yeah, it was a big project, and I know it was just released not long ago, and so we were going to discuss, kind of some of the findings from that. And I believe you've got a few of those on the slides here. You can actually find this whole report, just so our audience knows, if you go to wheatresearch.ca, and you can download. It's not too long of a report, actually. I think it's about 10 pages or so, and so it's relatively succinct. It's not difficult reading, but it's really, really insightful reading. So again, go to wheatresearch.ca. So I'm just curious, Jocelyn, from your perspective, like my chat with Jeff earlier, we want to stay positive in this. There's a lot happening right now. Cuts are never good. It's always, something that people are concerned about, but we want to keep the conversation constructive, keep it moving, and say, how do we move forward? And so, from your perspective, what should stakeholders really feel confident about right now?
Well, I think bringing research and the importance of research and wheat breeding to light has been one of the most positive things. And I know Jeff alluded to this as well, because now people are talking about it. And I think sometimes even as farmers, we forget, how far we've come in our industry and as farmers in our businesses, and the amazing varieties that we grow are part of that. And the practices, how we manage them, that is all from research as well. And so there's really been a highlight of, how important that is. Also, what I have appreciated from this whole process would be that farmers have significant contribution to research. We co-fund a lot of research that happens. And I think that not a lot of people understood that. And when you think about farmer dollars, we're private businesses and we're all pooling all our dollars, but it's really a private public partnership often with these projects, including the wheat breeding system. So we know that since 2020, the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition, and that's through farmer checkoff levy dollars, has funded $70.5 million into wheat breeding in Canada. So that's through AAFC as well as the universities. That's a significant number, and one that, all the more reason to take a look at the wheat breeding system, because we have a lot of stake and a lot of other people do as well. And we've seen the return on investment over and over again, and we want to keep that going.
I've got some findings from the report here. These were the major findings of the report: that the AAFC program is an integral part of Western Canadian wheat variety development. The system is at risk from recent and historic budget cuts, especially when it comes to variety development. Wheat breeding is a long-term process, and decisions made today are going to impact agriculture decades into the future. But really interesting for me was the report notes that, status quo is not an option. That was one of the big findings at the end of the report. And so, how would you describe the current landscape of wheat breeding in Western Canada? I mean, given how quickly things are evolving.
Well, the report was done in September of 2025. So that was before any of these cuts were made. So remember, the status quo is not an option. That statement was from September 2025. And so when we look at where we are now, there's more urgency to that. We're seeing more gaps and risks. But with the report, we saw through the wheat breeding continuum, we saw gaps and risks in the variety development and pre-market evaluation and testing areas. So there was enough gaps and risks identified there that we saw a serious concern in the current wheat breeding system. And so with that, I mean, that's that's a pretty serious statement, and one that the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition Board of Directors and staff really took a hard look at. And I think that's, we're looking at the next steps currently.
Now, the report says right at the end, like I noticed that we cannot keep status quo, but then there's a sentence right after that. It's on the last page. It says the future of wheat breeding in Canada is in the hands of farmers. What does that mean?
Well, with farmers funding about half of wheat breeding in Canada, I think that, right there, just funding wise, we have a huge stake in the game, as well as, farmers, it all starts with the seed, and we know that, and we need good varieties to have sustainable farms and profitable farms. And the reason that we've been able to grow wheat, and I know I appreciate this on my own farm, is because we get that yield stability, that quality year after year, and we know to manage for that. And so we need to keep getting those elite varieties to get into our markets, because most of our wheat is exported in Canada. And the importance of that is not lost on farmers. Yeah,
that's true. It is, like farmers funding half of wheat breeding in Canada right now. I mean, that's huge, and some people might be surprised to hear that, but it's also encouraging. I mean, farmers have a huge stake in this, and they're huge participants in this, and I think it's there's sort of this idea around, especially public breeding, AAFC breeding, that government just breeds new varieties and sort of delivers them to farmers. But I mean, it's not really the case. I mean, farmers are already funding a huge amount of that, so they're already really involved in the process. And before I switch over to Candace and Todd, what to you does farmer leadership look like? And how should that be influencing decision making, the fact that farmers are already funding half of wheat breeding in Canada?
I think that farmers, and with the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition, we have a certain nimbleness, as well as being able to reach out to all stakeholders and collaborate on the way forward. And that's a really positive thing to come out of whatever cuts have happened. In 2012, we saw cuts and loss of 60,000 plots in early breeding lines, and some of the testing sites, as Jeff talked about earlier. And wheat breeding is a numbers game, and the reason we've gotten so far and the great varieties that we're growing today is because of that. So looking forward, and with the recent cuts, we don't want to see any further gaps in the system. So we have 4 key drivers that we're looking at as we're looking towards transforming the wheat breeding system in Canada. We want to fill the critical gaps and risks that were identified, again, in the variety development and market evaluation and testing. We want to deliver superior field-ready varieties that give farmers choice in the market. That's very important. The third would be marketable yield, profitability, and giving farmers influence proportionate to investments. Farmers want to have a say in moving forward. The fourth would be protecting the long-term investments that farmers have already made. So moving forward, we are in conversations with AAFC. These conversations are important to the next steps and what we're looking at for transforming the wheat breeding system. And we don't want to see any gaps as we work through this either. So it's going to be a long road ahead and a lot of challenges. And I encourage everyone to stay tuned as to what the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition and to what farmers are doing.
Okay, so one more question for you. I know I said that the last one will be the last question, but I'm just curious, what does progress look like then? I mean, looking ahead, say, to the next year or two, I mean, for you, what would progress really look like from your vantage point?
Progress would be a long-term view system. It takes 13 years to create these wheat varieties. These wheat breeders are career breeders, and they need to have that long-term view to create the best varieties they can and to innovate within the system. So progress would look like a system that is able to function long term, and that a system that works for farmers works for the entire industry and works for Canada.
That should be no problem. Easy peasy, right?
Easy peasy.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Don't go anywhere. Hang on the line for our Q&A.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Great. Now I would like to welcome two more speakers today. That is Todd Green and Candice Woods from the County of Newell. Hi there. How are you today?
Wonderful. Thank you for having us.
Good. Well, thanks for being on. Now, the whole theme of today is to try and tell a good news story about plant breeding in Canada. And like I mentioned to Jocelyn, that can be hard to do when news breaks, like we heard with the AAFC cuts and closure of research stations. There's always a lot of emotions, understandably. But you both, being with the County of Newell in Alberta, you're not far from Lethbridge, have been through some of this. I mean, just to offer some background here, the County of Newell has taken over a former provincial research facility. It was called CDC South, Crop Diversification Center South, not to be confused with the Crop Development Center at the University of Saskatchewan. That is a different CDC. But the story shows what happens when traditional government-led research funding sort of retreats and new collaborative models have to emerge to preserve critical breeding infrastructure. So this is the recent issue of the Alberta Seed Guide, and the CDC South facility was featured on the cover. And then CDC South was once at risk of being lost, but is now operating under this, I guess you could say, a county-led cost recovery model that brings together municipal leadership, private researchers, multi-year leases, and provincial capital investment. But it's a kind of hybrid approach that I think is needed to sustain, a lot of times regional variety trials, greenhouse research, irrigated crop innovation. So this is a really good news story. So we're going to hear from Candice and Todd now. I'm just curious, can you fill us in, why CDC South matters so much to the industry in Alberta right now, and what capability were you determined to protect through this funding transition?
Yeah, great question. Certainly, CDC South has played a big role in our community for the last nearly 100 years. Starting not necessarily where we're at today, but in the city of Brooks, anyways. And as the province got out of directly funding research, the County of Newell was noting that the facility was being realistically underutilized. So we're sitting on a massive capital investment from the province in our county. We know there's a need for that facility from private researchers, from public researchers, from growers, and that's really what we're trying to be. There is we're trying to be that partnership where we're the landlord. We're helping researchers do what they need to do to grow the industry further.
So if CDC South hadn't been able to continue, if there wouldn't have been this arrangement, the province said, we're getting out of this, or we're not going to fund this facility any longer, what would have realistically happened to that research capacity, and what would the impact have been on Western Canadian research programs?
I think without us stepping in and taking over the facility, we probably would have seen the facility cease to exist within a few short years. The deficits that were happening out there in terms of the infrastructure were just getting too large. We were at a point where something had to be done, or there was going to have to be buildings condemned or torn down. So we were able to take the $3 million that we got in the provincial budget and turn that into capital upgrades to the facility, repairing much needed HVAC, getting the greenhouse back up and running, taking down some trees that were starting to become hazard to power lines, to buildings, to humans. Just kind of taking the facility and giving it a bit of a breath of life again.
So I don't for a minute want to paint a picture here that you have solved the problem. Everything's great. It's rainbows and sunshine over there. I mean, this is only the beginning. There are many challenges ahead, many hurdles to come. This is kind of uncharted waters for you. And so I'm curious, in developing a sustainable model, I mean, what does that actually mean for this research site, and why can't that be achieved by one stakeholder alone?
Boy, that's a good question. I think you've talked a lot already about the partnerships that need to exist. We're just one part of that equation. So if we can take the part of our problem and solve that, we should be able to have a long-term goal with other partners. CDC South is a pretty amazing property where we have dry land and irrigation. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for people in the industry.
So in terms of those partnerships, what does a strong partnership look like in practice? And what do you need? What are you looking for from seed companies, breeders, and other collaborators to really make this work over the long term?
We're really looking for a combination of all of it to bring everybody in, have multiple people utilizing the greenhouse space, the field space, to see some collaboration happening between the local users, seeing people sharing ideas and getting new ideas that come through, that natural conversation. We're hoping that, right now we're through our first year, almost through our first year now. We're hoping that in the next year, that's where we're going to see that growth start happening.
And so what are some of the pain points that you need to be on the lookout for? What are the biggest friction points, I guess, that really slow collaboration down? And what are you trying to do, I guess, to make CDC South easy to work with?
Well, I think it's removing the bureaucratic hurdles that might exist other places. I mean, truthfully, if somebody wants to work at CDC South, you're looking at the wonderful person you get to deal with. And it's one line of communication, it's one line of contact, and it's very simple. We know what we have. When we hear the ideas that people need, we try to marry those things together, and away we go. It's pretty simple.
Before I get to our final speaker, Brent Durkach, so one more question. Looking 10 years, say, down the road, what's the one thing you need from industry, government, and breeders in the next, say, 12 to 24 months in order to try and get there?
We need to have the people with the ideas and the need to start contacting us, to bring their ideas to the table. Maybe we've talked to somebody who has a similar idea, that there's able to set up some match making between people, and ultimately we want the place to pay for itself. The County of Newell has taken on this project, and we're pretty serious about having it not cause our ratepayers having their taxes go up or anything like that. We want this to be a self-sufficient model within the next 12 to 24 months.
Right. Yeah. So you need people to come to the table, and there's discussions that need to happen on both sides of that table. And so it's fascinating to see this sort of play out. Like I say, it's still early days, but the partnerships that you're currently forming and that you will form are really going to be interesting to watch. So if anybody wants to find out more about the CDC South facility, you can go to the website and learn more about, this really, really cool, very innovative partnership that we're going to be watching as time goes on, and all the best. And we'll be checking back in with you both down the road to see how things are progressing. But don't go anywhere, because we're going to be doing our Q&A soon. Thank you so much, Todd and Candace.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks again. And again, to our audience, if you have a question, type it into the chat box at any time. You don't have to wait until the very end. Brent, welcome. How are you today?
Great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, when you are president and CEO of Cantera Seeds in Winnipeg, and as I said, CCAN is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and Cantera Seeds is actually celebrating its 30th. I believe you just marked the occasion this past Saturday, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. A really important milestone in the history of our company, founded by 9 seed growers 30 years ago to getting to this point here now in 2026. Pretty exciting. In some ways, it feels like a long time. In other ways, it feels like we're just getting started.
Yeah, well, and it's really appropriate for this conversation, because when you think 30 years ago, what the landscape looked like for plant breeding in Canada compared to what it looks like today, just in terms of government funding, technology, grower preferences, just the selection of crops that were out there. I mean, 30 years ago, you weren't seeing what you see today when you drive down the highway, soybean fields and all kinds of different things. That 30 years ago, it was, if somebody from 30 years ago came today and was driving, what is that crop? What am I seeing here? So the landscape looks much different, to say the least. And Cantera Seeds, of course, holds the rights to numerous public varieties. You do have the Lima Grain Cereals Research Canada venture, yes, that you partner with Lima Grain on, but you also hold the right to a lot of AAFC varieties, and so you have a private. You have a big stake in this. There's a lot of concerns that you have moving forward, and like CCAN, you kind of straddle that fence between the public and private worlds of plant breeding. And so, Brent, how do you see that foundational public research evolving, and what risks do we face as a sector if that foundational work is weakened?
Yeah, Mark, this is maybe at the core one of the more important topics that need to be discussed. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide some perspective here and provide some complementary views to the other presenters today as well. Hey, listen, without question, foundational research or pre-competitive research is critical to the ag sector, and I think one of the most effective ways to support pre-competitive research is to do it within a public system, and I think we've been doing a really good job of that. I mean, we need those building blocks for variety development, and I think there is a high degree of public good that comes with pre-competitive research. And then it's from there, it's about amplifying that incredible work through all breeding programs, whether they're large or small or private or public, all can benefit from foundational research. So, I mean, there is a big risk if we ignore foundational research that it'll have, long-term impacts that won't allow us to be as competitive globally.
So there's been some developments in the industry, recently that have highlighted how interconnected public and private breeding efforts really are. From your perspective, I mean, how dependent are we on collaboration between programs and locations, and what could be lost if that ecosystem sort of fragments?
Yeah, with all of the various conversations and virtual meetings and in-person meetings that happened in the weeks following the AAFC cut announcements, I think most stakeholders, and I'll put myself in that category as well, really underappreciated the level of interdependence that occurred between Ag Canada stations and the broader research and breeding community. So, there's lots of examples of work that was done with, trial swaps or shared lab space or disease and quality testing. And I think it seemed to work. And it maybe at times even it was taken a little bit for granted. Now that there's been disruptions to that, I think it's definitely put many of us on our heels a little bit. I mean, even private industry had been collaborating and utilizing some of the services of the public sector for various activities. And, even as Jeff alluded to earlier, an example being the pending closure of the Indian Head location and the breeder seed increase unit, that definitely has, a pretty significant impact on the, supplying high quality breeder seed to seed distribution companies and our network of select seed growers.
So Jeff was talking earlier about, public breeding doesn't always mean government breeding. And as I mentioned, Canterra Seeds works as a licensee of both public varieties and through private breeding investment with Lima Grain. And so how should Canada think about, that right balance between public and private breeding to ensure long-term innovation?
Well, you alluded to it in your intro that, as an example, Canterra Seeds is a little bit of a unique participant in the sector, being both a licensee of public varieties, both from Ag Canada, university breeding programs and other private programs. And we've also been investing for, 10 years together with Lima Grain Cereals Research Canada. So, we do definitely see the requirement for public and private participation. We have positioned ourselves, particularly in recent weeks, and as the topic has been elevated in many circles of discussion, that we want to be part of the solution as well. Not the solution, but part of the solution. And listen, I think a first step, or one of the first steps, is to be clear from the beginning that we need to find the right balance of public and private versus, looking at it as public instead of private or private instead of public. Even looking at the CWRC report, which I think did a really, really good job of outlining the issue at hand and identifying those timelines for variety development, as Jocelyn had referred to. That report specifically calls out, university and private breeding programs as being critically important to the health of the entire Western Canadian wheat breeding innovation system. That's a direct quote from that report. And, Canada being, a very important global player, we're competing not just on our grain exports, but we're also competing for global investment dollars and the skilled people that we need to do all the work. And then there's also all of the, new and emerging technologies that is in the world of plant breeding. And so we need to build a system that's going to be bigger, stronger, faster to ultimately attract that innovation and people and dollars to Canada to complement all the other work that's being done. And I think also it's important that, we can't hide behind the fact that if we're going to attract innovation to Canada, that we, and if those entities are providing innovation and creating value, they're going to want to be fairly compensated.
Yeah, I think, the conversation's really moved on in recent weeks. I think when the news broke about the cuts, that there was, there's sort of this initial reaction that, well, we have to preserve what we have. We have to convince government to sort of reverse what they're doing. And I think, the conversation is now at a point where, like you say, I think people understand that we all understand, okay, we need to build something new here. We have to move forward. And it's not a question of trying to, so much a question of trying to keep what we have, but it's rather to, like you say, build that new system that we need for the future. And so as Canada competes globally for, skilled breeders and researchers and investment, what kind of a long-term commitment is needed then? Not just, I guess, in funding, but, talent development, technology adoption. What do we have to do to make Canada the best place in the world for variety development? I know that's a huge question, Brent, but what do you think?
It is a big question, Mark. It's going to take a little bit of a crystal ball, but as I was preparing for today, I was trying to look even beyond sort of the agriculture sector, and I've been a part of dozens and dozens of conversation in recent weeks about this really important topic. And one comparable, and maybe it's not a fair comparison, but I'm going to use it anyway as, maybe it's motivation or a bit of a reality check. So we're coming off of the heels of the completion of the Winter Olympics. I'm a huge sports fan. I love watching, sport competition. And so both, the regular Olympics and then the recently finished Paralympic Games. If we look back in time, there's a bit of a comparison here that I see in what's been happening in plant breeding and what what the outcome have been in our international competitiveness in sport. So when we were hosting the Winter Olympics back in 2010, we took an own the podium approach, and there was a huge commitment of increased resources and facilities to make sure that our athletes could absolutely do their best. And that was a combination of, government dollars, and there was also a huge call for corporate sponsors to step up and make a difference. And it was a huge success. And, even as we fast forward to, the subsequent Olympics after we hosted, we did really, really well. Now, if we look at the results of this year, we had the lowest medal totals that we've had in the past 24 years. And I think there is it's a bit of a lagging indicator, somewhat similar to what is possible or could happen in the plant breeding space. And so, now there are some, a rising voice that, maybe we need to revisit also our approach to supporting our international competitiveness in sport. And that's again, rallying both public and private resources, expertise. Think about attracting the best coaches, keeping some of the best athletes. We've even had some athletes that have defected to other countries because they get better support there. I mean, if we're going to have an own the podium approach in plant breeding, we have to make a real, true, multifaceted commitment to investing and attracting, retaining the best, and so how do we measure and reward success ultimately if we can have an own the podium approach? I mean, from my perspective, the farmer is the one that should ultimately stand at the top of the podium. And I think it's going to take, public, private, large and small programs to ultimately provide value. And as Jocelyn mentioned earlier, it all starts with the seed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that own the podium concept for plant breeding, because plant breeders really are like the athletes of the seed world. I mean, they're the ones out there who have to perform to do those hard tasks that require years of, like you say, training and can take 12, 13 years from that first cross to when a variety makes it to market. And so that's a great way to put it. No, thank you, Brent. Certainly appreciate having your insights, and I'll welcome back all of our speakers now for our brief Q&A. We still have a few minutes here, and so if you have a few questions, or if you have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we'll take about 7 or 8 minutes here to take some questions. We already have several come in, and so I'm just going to bring them up here quickly. All right. So in the short term, how do you think seed increase will be managed with the impending closure of Indian Head? I believe, Jeff, I think you commented earlier on some recent news regarding that. Maybe I'll throw that one out to you, Jeff, but anybody feel free to chime in. Whether it has to do with Indian Head or seed increase in general, how do you think seed increase will be managed with the impending closure of research stations like Indian Head?
Yeah, so we heard directly from AAFC a few weeks ago. They held a industry update webinar indicating that Indian Head would stay open and in the business at least for 2026, with longer term with the intent of moving that seed increase to Saskatoon. I guess from our perspective, we're not entirely comfortable necessarily with that concept, knowing that the land, the facilities, the equipment, the people, and everything that is in place at Indian Head is very hard to replace or replicate otherwise. So I guess AAFC does have a vision for that, but hopefully that's still maybe somewhat in the formative stages, because we think that maybe there is an opportunity in working together with the likes of producers and industry and IHARF and so on. Maybe there's an opportunity to do that more efficiently just by keeping it where it is in Indian Head. But one way or the other, I'm sure we will come up with a solution to that, be it in Indian Head or Saskatoon or otherwise.
Yeah, Brent, is that something that's of a concern to Canterra?
Yeah, without question. I think Jeff hit the important points there. It's the uncertainty with moving from one location to another. Land use history is so critically important for breeder seed increase to ensure purity and certification. And you do need the people to be able to, and equipment to be able to effectively manage it along the way. So it's a big concern, and it's not easy to just pick something up and move something of that size and stature from one location to another. So there's a lot of work that'll have to be done to ensure that there's continuity and success.
Yeah, Jocelyn, I see you nodding your head, so that's probably something that in the realm of wheat development that is probably top of mind right now as well.
Absolutely, and I like Indian Head is near and dear to me, I guess, as a farmer, being that it's only 80 kilometers away, and that would be the nearest varieties grown there would be nearest to me, and really representative of an ecoregion. And with it taken out, there wouldn't be that representation. And so within Western Canada, we know it's a huge area, and all of these research stations kind of covered each ecoregion. And so with the Fusarium Headblight Nursery as well, and it's been talked about with the seed increase unit, those are really integral to the wheat breeding system. And we don't want to see any gaps. There's huge risks if we do with the seed increase unit, but also with the Fusarium Headblight Nursery. And I was at a presentation that Richard Cuthbert gave to CWRC a couple of years ago, and he talked about the Fusarium Headblight Nursery and how it had just the right conditions to show the differences in the varieties. So for me, I'm thinking that's pretty important. So yeah, that's definitely a concern.
Interesting you mentioned Richard Cuthbert. There's a question here. With AAFC moving to more upstream research, how confident are you that AAFC will replace the core wheat breeding position at Swift Current vacated by Richard Cuthbert? I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody can comment on specific positions, but when you hear of researchers like Richard Cuthbert who are leaving AAFC, and I know there's been for years concerns about when breeders leave government positions and aren't replaced. Is that a concern for anybody at the moment? I don't know, Brent, maybe I'll throw that one out to you. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that concern many times, that breeders leave and then aren't replaced. And that sort of touches on what you were talking about, Brent, about, we don't want to be a net exporter of breeding talent. And I guess anytime you hear of somebody like that leaving, it's probably a concern to you as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, we need every breeder available. We need them to be contributing to our plant breeding ecosystem. And somebody of Richard's experience and stature is a huge loss for the industry. So, I would hate for us to see others choose to leave. He obviously had his reasons for leaving, but if anything, we need to continue to look at ways to retain and attract new expertise. I mean, we could combine as much financial resources as possible, but if we don't actually have skilled individuals to put it in motion, we're not going to get very far. So we definitely need to have a plant breeding expertise focus as well.
And And if I could just to build on Brent's point there, I think if we look back at what was the purpose for these government cuts in the first place, I mean, I think it was to get rid of or to streamline operations in order to create capacity to invest in things that would grow the economy. And I mean, what better way is there possibly to grow the economy than to have someone of Richard's caliber breeding there? So we'll be pushing, as I'm sure producers and everyone else is, to make sure that that position is filled with with a skilled individual.
Yeah, no. It's we'll see what happens there. I don't think anybody knows for sure regarding that specific position, but we'll. I'm sure there will be headlines forthcoming. So, in terms of funding models, I have a question about. It's pointed out that farmers, as you said, Jocelyn, farmers are funding a large portion of wheat breeding currently. Wheat breeding can continue as status quo. What funding models is CWRC looking into to fill the gaps that exist? Or are there any particular specific funding models, Jocelyn, that have been kind of tossed around or anything like that?
Right now, we're looking at the system and how to fix the system as step one. Looking at funding models will be down the line for sure, but we haven't looked at any specific ones yet. But we'll definitely be looking at all of them moving forward.
Yeah, I imagine that's something, Candace and Todd, that you can comment on as funding models and how to design them. And Candace and Todd, what's your advice for? I'm not going to ask you to recommend a specific kind of funding model, but for people who are looking to design a funding model or funding models plural, what would be your advice for what's that first thing you should look at for developing something that you think would be effective?
Wow.
Not an easy question, I know.
No, certainly not. I guess the approach we took locally was we had interested parties, we had an opportunity, and we knew we had to bring people together. So certainly, as Candace mentioned, the county doesn't want to be the funder of the site, but we want to make sure that the people that utilize the site are, the part that they're using is their share of the funding. So that we call them partnerships, collaboration. Losing government funding is not new to us. That's been the provincial government funding locally has diminished over the last 25 years. The big cuts for the Brooks facility happened in 2019. So that's where our venture kind of started in about 2021, looking at this collaboration to keep this site and have people pay for it. So the partnerships part is very, very important.
Yeah, good point. We just passed the 1 hour mark. I'm just going to do one more question here, but there's a couple of questions here that I can sort of put together. There is a comment, actually, that the top varieties planted in 2025 were the result of research started between 2001 and 2009. And then there's another question, a comment, it takes an average of 13 years from the initial cross to a commercial release. And so could farmers face a variety cliff around 2039? That's an interesting one. I guess if we keep status quo and we don't do anything and we don't pay any attention to what the CWRC report says, and I'll just throw that out there. Could we face a variety cliff around 2039?
I'm happy to maybe just start the conversation, start an answer there. I think one of the things that comes to mind is that during the Prairie Grain Development Committee meetings a couple of weeks ago, Anthony Parker from the Plant Breeders' Rights Office showed some data that outlined the number of varieties of field crops that are where applications are being received by his office for Plant Breeders' Rights protection. And the last couple of years have shown a steady decline. And so I think there's potentially some correlation related to some of the cuts that were made a number of years ago that are now possibly and likely contributing to sort of decline of the number of new varieties and overall competitiveness. And so I think, you know, to one of the more important areas of the CWRC report is, you know, as Jocelyn had mentioned, we've got the level of understanding of the current state and the length of time that it actually takes for variety development. Just having that message shared broadly throughout the value chain is a really, really important part, because there is going to be a lagging indicator here of our overall productivity because of that timeline for plant breeding. So, you know, it's not, and even changes that are made now, it's not going to be an instant gratification outcome. We just harvested a record crop. You know, there's a lot of farmers and other stakeholders that might view as the situation as nothing's broken. But it's going to take a lot of leadership from the industry to make change, because it will have very significant and important long-term benefits.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead, Jocelyn.
I'll just jump in here. I think, you know, farmers know that we're in a long-term business as well. And we know that things evolve and change in the industry, or, you know, the environment we grow our crops in. And we're going to continuously be, you know, met with different challenges. And so just to not grow and just to be okay with kind of going on the decline, that's why status quo is not an option. And farmers see that for sure.
Jeff, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Yeah, and if I could, I mean, I don't think we're going to have to wait for 2039 to see that impact, because, as you said, you know, it was between 01 and 09 created those, you know, those leaders of 2025. Well, so we haven't even, you know, we haven't factored in yet the impact of cuts, for example, that started happening in 2012. So those, you know, those things, fingers crossed, aren't too devastating to the industry over the coming years. But boy, if, you know, if we start layering on more cuts on top of that, that's going to be hugely problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Candace and Todd, I'll give you the last word here. You know, operating a research facility, I mean, you see the research get done. I mean, you know how painstaking, especially when there's irrigation involved, and you know, you see it firsthand when you look out your window. What would be, your message to the industry? Or like, I think it was it Brent who said that, or maybe Jeff who said that sometimes people think everything's fine because we just harvested a record crop, and well, there's no problem. We don't have to worry about anything. But you know, quite often there can be a problem, but you just don't necessarily see it right away. And so for you, when you look out the window and you see that research getting done, what's your message to anyone who maybe doesn't quite appreciate how painstaking it really is?
Well, without sounding too much like a sales pitch, I guess, just from the conversation that, you know, we've been listening to on our side from the great presenters. I mean, we need, obviously there's the funding part, there's the people part, there's the facility part. All those have to come together. And if you don't have them all, we talked about losing one of the research scientists, and he needs a place to do that kind of thing, right? So when we look out the window and we see research going on, it kind of fills our heart a little bit. We know that's what the place was designed for. And we'd like to see more of that, right? See the benefits of that land.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This has been a really good webinar. I feel like we could sit and talk about this all day, but it is past the lunch hour now, and so I'm going to cut things off here. But I want to thank everybody, our speakers, Jocelyn, Brent, Jeff, Candace, Todd, for taking part today. I want to thank our audience for spending their lunch hour with us. As I said, a recording of this webinar will be available soon on our website, seedworld.com/Canada. I just want to take one more opportunity to thank our sponsor, CCAN, for their support. Again, if you registered for this webinar, you will get an email with the recorded version that you can share the recorded version far and wide. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I really enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed hearing the insights as much as I did. So thank you. I hope you all have a great day. And this is Mark Zinkwitz of SeedWorld Canada signing off. Have a great week, everybody. It's only Monday. But like I say, this will be the very beginning of what's going to be a very big conversation about the future of plant breeding in Canada. So Jocelyn, Brent, Jeff, Candice, Todd, have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks to our audience. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.